A love story. There's a story about a man who tries to bring his love back from the dead and loses her because he looks back. It's ancient, it's tragic, and somehow it's also Moulin Rouge. All right, you're listening to a Tale Oft Told podcast, a podcast where in each episode we explore how films, books, or any media retell the ancient myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. As we delve into the movie Moulin Rouge, one minor disadvantage, it's actually not a minor disadvantage, it's a huge disadvantage, and it's going to be a huge disadvantage going forward into a lot of our podcasts, is that despite this movie being chock full of music and theatrics, it's incredibly intellectually protected. So as an opener, I played a public domain version of what's commonly known as the French can-can song. It was the song you were just listening to. It was also featured in the original Moulin Rouge, filmed in 1952, where the courtesans are famous for tossing and kicking their legs in the air to this very song. However, ironically, this song is actually not originally the French can-can song. It's titled Galop Infernal and is part of the operetta Orpheus en Enfer, or Orpheus in the Underworld. And yeah, I'm not making this stuff up. Already we have a connection. Seriously. So what does an ancient Greek myth and a glitter-soaked cabaret have in common? More than you'd think. Moulin Rouge came out in 2001. It had a $50 million budget and it grossed about $179 million worldwide, making it a stellar commercial box office success. Currently, as of 2026, Moulin Rouge is now celebrating, and if you do the math, it's celebrating its 25th anniversary. And my God, has it really been that long? It just doesn't feel like it has been. Nicole Kidman and Ewan McGregor even presented an award together at the 2026 Oscar Awards to celebrate the anniversary. In 2001, personally, I was at that point in college, and on the radio, I remember, was the constant boom of Christina Aguilera, Lil' Kim, Maya, and Pink covering Lady Marmalade, better known as the Voulez-vous coucher avec moi song, which was the song produced to market Moulin Rouge. And I will admit it was one hell of a cover. And the video was even more top-notch to boot. It definitely gave the sense that this movie was going to be a smash. The video features all four artists, along with Missy Elliott, dressed in French can-can boudoir outfits with lots of rouge and lipstick, all of them just singing their faces off. And 2 years after the movie was released, I remember the soundtrack was still being played throughout my college dorms by my female college dorm mates. And while I'm a guy, and at that point it was never really to my taste, what did absolutely have me in awe was just the sheer number of songs incorporated into this film. In the first half hour alone, the film throws a rapid-fire collage of pop songs at you, reimagined inside this surreal early 1900s Parisian fever dream. It opens with Nature Boy by Nat King Cole, then The Sound of Music, then Children of the Revolution by T-Rex, and then Chaos, then Lady Marmalade, then Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana. And just a quick side note, Courtney Love, Kurt Cobain's former wife, as well as she was a rock and pop singer herself, had auditioned for the part of Satine, and it was at that point that she had given her permission for Smells Like Teen Spirit to be included in the movie. They also included Burning Down the House by the Talking Heads. When Satine enters into the movie, she sings Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, layered with Material Girl by Madonna. And when Christian and Satine finally connect in the movie, the film pulls from everything, including the Beatles, Phil Collins, U2, even a line from Elton John's Your Song. Frankly, it's overwhelming. Sensory overload doesn't even begin to describe it. And maybe, just maybe, all of this spectacle is there to distract from a very simple truth: that this movie is Orphic. So how is it Orphic? Well, let's dive right in, shall we? So the movie starts with Christian, and the name Christian speaks to a protagonist who is optimistic, hopeful, idealistic, Christ-like, in a world that can be anything but. He is our Orpheus, played by a boyishly handsome Ewan McGregor, who sits alone in his flat, typing in his typewriter the phrase, "The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return." It's simple, almost painfully simple. And yet, when Christian writes it, he's alone, disheveled, heartbroken. The idea is there. The reality is not. We are whisked back to 1 year before, when a young, naive, excited Christian arrives to the Montmartre area of Paris with big plans to make it in a big theater. He's working on his typewriter in his newly obtained flat when suddenly, bursting through the ceiling, falls an unconscious Argentine. And literally, in the narration, it states just that. An unconscious Argentine falls through the ceiling. Peeking through the wall is several men, one of whom is Jean Louisiamo. There's a lot happening here. So briefly, basically he meets Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec, who's played by Jean Louisiamo, and his troupe of performers who are writing a play called Spectacular Spectacular. And after kind of a tense exchange, the old writer of the troupe quits, leaving Christian to help them to complete the play. In order to find talent, they decide to go to the decadent monument of sexy courtesan circus, the Moulin Rouge. And it's here where the opening sequence is just pure sensory spectacle. It's at the Moulin Rouge where they hope Christian's talents will impress Satine, the star performer and courtesan, to be an actress in their play. And in the chaos of borrowed music, backflips, lifted skirts revealing garters and breeches, and bright red rouge and lipstick, we are then met with Harold Zidler, who's based on the real proprietor of the old original Moulin Rouge. And he's presented in this kind of hyperactive perma-smiling ringmaster. It's here that Satine comes out in a lifted hoop singing Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. She's chirpy, kind of flighty, channeling her own inner Marilyn Monroe. And Christian is immediately enamored, along with everyone else. And as she comes down, she then passes out, and she's taken quickly backstage, temporarily, where she coughs up blood. And this is where our Satine, or our Eurydice, appears to have her first snake bite, a form of consumption. That's right, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to deduce that already her days are limited. Harold Zidler, however, is a businessman, and he and his courtesans all know that the bills got to get paid. So Zidler plans to have the wealthy, powerful, and unscrupulous Duke of Monmouth sleep with Satine in exchange for potential financing to convert the club into a theater. And in all the chaos and gyrating of the dancing that's occurring in the Moulin Rouge at that moment, when he tries to point and signal Satine towards the Duke, a scuffle in that moment between the Duke and Henri and one of his henchmen leads his finger to point mistakenly at Christian, making Satine mistakenly think that Christian is the Duke. Zidler goes to set her up with the Duke so he can have his way with her. And instead, she ends up meeting with Christian, thinking that he's the Duke, where they inevitably, in a moment of being alone together, fall in love. And when she finds out that he's just a penniless writer, and she's dismayed, if only but for a second, she still, just as he feels, an incredible love for him. And the two are falling in love. But just then, the real Duke appears, angry that his courtesan, his chosen courtesan, has been picked up by someone else. He plans retribution just as Henri de Toulouse, or John Louisiamo, bursts in with his troupe and convinces the Duke and Zidler that they're actually doing a rehearsal. On the fly, they come up with a story to get the Duke to invest in a play. And as they go through the story, which is basically a poor sitar player falling in love with a courtesan who falls in love with him, but there's the jealous Maharaj, which is all very, very much parallel to both their story as well as the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. And reluctantly, kind of unsure, the Duke somehow agrees to give it a shot. So when everyone has left and the dust is settled, Satine finds herself alone on a balcony outside of her quarters. And she's processing the interaction and the fact that she's just fallen basically head over heels for Christian. And what do you do when you're processing the fact that you've fallen head over heels? You break into song and sing a bunch of lyrics based on covers of songs. I mean, how could you not? Think about the last time you fell head over heels in love. You probably just blurted out the song. Don't lie. And as she's singing, Christian climbs up to meet her in what I can only describe as basically like the Romeo and Juliet balcony moment of the movie. And together, they have what I would describe as a pretty interesting back and forth debate via jukebox tunes over the practicality of love versus the need to be sustained and not falling to the dregs of the street, the Parisian streets, that finally finishes with Satine stating to Christian, "You're going to be bad for business. I can tell." Now let's stop right here for a moment, because this is going to be a recurring theme in a lot of our Orphic interpretations. The idea that a girl has got to eat. Romantic love versus arranged betrothals for economic gain or stability. Do you go to be with the penniless, charming good guy with whom you feel alive? Or do you go to be with a rich asshole who keeps you alive? It's the reality of hypergamy, and for the hopelessly romantic, this can be an incredibly painful conundrum. Back at the Moulin Rouge, the Duke makes a deal with Zidler that in exchange for investing in the play, he demands the deed for the Moulin Rouge and the complete attachment of Satine to him. It's really a horrible deal. But Zidler agrees, or at least, perhaps, maybe he has no option but to agree. And Christian continues to write and spend time with his play's new star actress and his new love, Satine, as well as with his new friend, Henri de Toulouse, and all the other actors. And they are successful in creating reasons to continually avoid Satine from falling into the Duke's constraints, until finally the Duke has had enough. Zidler intervenes, explaining to Satine that the Duke holds the deeds to the Moulin Rouge. Thus, she needs to go to the Duke. She needs to end it with Christian. She must meet the Duke in the tower that night at 8 p.m. And it's at this point that the inevitability of Satine's fate to be with the Duke, as well as her worsening consumption, begin to overtake her. Again, Satine tries to avoid being with the Duke. Zidler goes ahead and takes the initiative, and he tries to convince the Duke that she is going to confess to a priest for her sins so she can go to the Duke all the more pure. Logically, he does this by singing Madonna's Like a Virgin to the Duke. And of course, the Duke is left utterly convinced. Clearly, Christian is not the only one who can charm Hades with his lyre. Then we cut to a scene in which the Duke is watching the play, and he's confused as to why the courtesan chooses the penniless sitar player over the rich Maharaja. The irony, again, is obvious here. He instructs Zidler to rewrite the play so that the courtesan goes with the Maharaja and their secret love song is over. Satine then relents to go with the Duke. Christian begs her not to go, but she assures him it's for the good of everyone. She implores him not to be jealous. So she goes to the tower. The thing about the tower is that it feels underworldly. It's perhaps in this moment that things really are starting to feel Orphic. Satine is dressed as if she's going to a funeral, as if she's death herself, preparing to give herself to the Duke. And back at the Moulin Rouge, a theater courtesan assures Christian that you'll get your ending when the Duke gets his. The Argentine then breaks into storyteller mode, and he does so by singing and dancing a tango version of Roxanne by the Police, singing about the perils of falling in love with the woman who sells herself. And he makes his point quite well. The Duke assures Satine, back at the tower, that she can be taken care of. And she then tries to convince the Duke to keep the ending to their play the way that it was, the way that Christian had written it. And from the tower's balcony, as she steps out to get some fresh air, she lays her eyes on a passing Christian below, and she begins to sing their love song. The Duke sees this and is infuriated. It's in that moment that he tries to rape Satine. But Le Chocolat, a male cabaret dancer, breaks in and knocks the Duke out. Once having regained consciousness, the Duke, madder than ever, tells Zidler that the show must end the way he wants it to, and that if Satine doesn't go to him, he'll have Christian killed. When Zidler goes to Satine to tell her the unfortunate turn of events, Satine appears indifferent. She says she's going to go away with Christian because she now has the one thing she's never had, a man who loves her. She's more than just what a man will pay for her. It's in that moment that Zidler reminds her that she's dying, that she has consumption. And he convinces Satine that the way to show love to Christian is to hurt him. She must reject him to save him from being killed. Also, Zidler is a businessman, and he wants the show to go on. Now at this point, I want to point out that Zidler literally says, "We're creatures of the underworld. We can't afford to love." The film says it out loud. It knows exactly what it's doing. And it's not the first time we've heard it. In episode 1, when we go over Orphée by Jean Cocteau, it gives us a version of the exact same idea, that love and the underworld don't coexist. And so the show still must go on. Satine ends up breaking up with Christian, and Christian responds, understandably, with despair and disbelief. She states that she is like the Hindu courtesan of the play. She chooses the Maharaja, and that's how the story is going to end. So on opening night, a heartbroken and devastated Christian returns to the Moulin Rouge, and while we see the opening of a spectacular Bollywood-like production of the play, as Satine makes her entrance, she's nearly overcome by consumption symptoms. But she's able to regain her composure, and she breaks back into her song, "Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend." Meanwhile, Christian continues his infiltration of the Moulin Rouge, trying to find Satine so that he can give her his final words and thoughts. And instead, he finds himself awkwardly on a live stage with Satine in front of the entire crowd. He takes advantage of the situation, and he uses that stage to be able to share and say what he thinks. He says, "I owe you nothing, and you're nothing to me." And he tosses his earnings to her on the ground as she lays there. And as he walks out in anger, Henri de Toulouse shouts the magic line, "The greatest thing is to be loved and be loved in return." Satine then sings to him and tells him that she loves him till the end of time. He then breaks into song and sings back to her in return. The love is rekindled. The Duke's henchman tries to kill him, but fails, and as his gun rolls directly into the crowd within reach of the Duke, just as he tries to grab it, he himself is knocked down. And so, after all of that, hip hip hooray, Christian, or our Orpheus, gets his Eurydice back from the underworld. But it's totally short-lived, for she ends up dying of consumption shortly after the play. She promises him, in her dying words, that she'll always be with him as she dies in his arms, leaving him sobbing mercilessly. Death takes what is rightfully theirs in the end. And the story ends with Christian months later going to his typewriter to write his tale about a love that will live forever. And that is the end of Moulin Rouge. So what kind of impact did this movie have? What I recall is that with this movie there was a kind of playful 1920s French sexiness that had made its comeback there in the early 2000s. Suddenly, corsets and boudoir shoots were popular among women. And it's also worth mentioning that just economically, this was a very stable time in America. The movie was released in June of 2001, 3 months before 9/11, when things would never be the same in the world after. And it was 7 years before the economic real estate crash of 2008. So in 2001, America was generally having a good time. During the late 90s and early 2000s, one had a sense that a lot of the popular film, music, and books that came out were, and I personally am going to coin this term, ultra. Nowadays, you'll hear the term extra, as in that person is extra. But in that specific time, it felt like things were ultra. Why ultra? Well, because every movie didn't just want to be a movie, but rather the movie. The songs that were coming out wanted to be the song and not just a song. Moulin Rouge just came out swinging in every way, from its glitzy production, its use of the most popular pop stars in its marketing video, and the release of its soundtrack. It just feels ultra. Think Gladiator, or The Matrix, or Fight Club, or Pulp Fiction. All of those genre-defining movies that had these huge budgets and had lasting impacts. Speaking of lasting impacts, has Moulin Rouge endured? As for my own tastes, I would say no. But when I type Moulin Rouge into a search engine, I'm clearly wrong. There's a musical production of Moulin Rouge, and there is the actual Moulin Rouge in France, which still exists or has been reborn and still features dancers and performances to this very day. The cover of Lady Marmalade, which was the marketing scheme of Moulin Rouge, sits at a comfortable 626 million views on YouTube. And the original version of Lady Marmalade is about a woman in New Orleans. And to adapt the song to Moulin Rouge, they changed the lyrics to say Moulin Rouge instead of New Orleans. No one remembers that Lady Marmalade originally said New Orleans. But as we reach the end of this episode, I just want to point out that this story ends the way it always seems to. He gets her back just long enough to lose her again, not because he failed, not because he didn't love her enough, but because some stories aren't built to let love win. Moulin Rouge dresses it all up in music and color and spectacle. It distracts you, it overwhelms you, it makes you laugh. Sometimes we even forget that this is an incredibly sad movie. But then quietly, it does what the story has always done. It takes her. And maybe that's why this story keeps returning. Because it understands something uncomfortable. That love doesn't always save us. That sometimes the act of loving is the tragedy itself. In this version, Eurydice was never taken to the underworld. She was already there. And Orpheus, hopeful, naive, full of song, believed just for a moment that he could bring her back. But the rules don't change. They never do. Don't look back. Don't fall in love. Don't try to keep what was never yours to keep. And yet, he does. Every time. Because that's the story. And maybe that's us too. This has been a Tale Oft Told podcast. Before we leave, stories of loss and descent have always been part of the human tradition. But if the themes in today's episode stirred something difficult in you, please know that you don't have to carry that alone. In the United States, you can call or text 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, to reach trained counselors of any time. They're there to listen. Even in the oldest stories, the journey into darkness is never meant to be taken alone. Take care of yourselves, listeners, and I'll see you next time on A Tale Oft Told.